Good?
Yeah, I think.
All right, Boris. Okay, we'll get going here. So we heard a lot this morning and throughout the recent couple of weeks and months about managing kind of the regulatory dynamic and how different it can be from one state to the next. But Curaleaf has a really interesting position and profile. You're the largest cannabis company in the world. You have the largest U.S. footprint, but you also manage an international business that's growing. And so you see a lot of regulatory dynamics across all different contexts. And I'm curious how you manage that as the CEO of the company, but also within the company's culture, and what type of priority this represents for Curaleaf.
It's a simple answer. I sleep like a baby. I wake up every 10 minutes screaming.
I walked into that one. Yeah.
Listen, I would say the biggest difference between the European regulatory environment and the U.S. regulatory environment, the European markets didn't have the sort of unfair incarceration, and so that they don't have the same social equity pressures that the U.S. does. And so there's a lot more emphasis on social equity issues in the U.S. Regulatory environment and working through them. And I think that the industry is starting to have a better dialogue with regulators on that. I think there was a lot of misunderstanding early on in the process. And I think that, as the previous regulator said, as time goes on, I think we're building good relationships between ourselves and the regulators in the U.S. on those issues. And the difficulty in the U.S., of course, is that every single state has their own different sets of regulations. So even if you take the social equity piece out of it, you still have an enormous amount of other issues that are different products, different marketing rules, different packaging rules, different things. And so we're all trying to get to a consensus where we can try to standardize across the industry. And I think as there's more pressure on cannabis in the US, I think regulators are getting to be a little bit more flexible. In Europe, it's a slightly different environment. It's a 100% medical environment, unlike the US, which is split between medical and adult use. And let's be honest, most of the US, even the medical programs, were largely also adult use driven. So the European is strictly medical. We operate under pharmaceutical licenses in Europe. And so we have very strict regulation in that area. But on the other hand, we have, because it's legal and there's no differentiation between local regions of Germany and the German federal government, there's one set of rules. And so we operate within those set of rules. It's quite transparent. We know where we're going. But just like the US, you do have changes. Germany's about to go through some changes after their legalization recently. They're going to go through it. That creates uncertainty. But listen, it's an early industry, and we have to navigate all the different pitfalls. But all in all, I'd say we're all making progress.
Would you say that from obviously you're dealing with the regulators directly, but the culture of the company, how does it vary between what you have happening in Europe and the US? Is there any sort of different imperative facing off against the regulators?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in Europe, as I said, being a medical company, we almost operate as a pharmaceutical. It is dramatically different than the US environment, where we operate as a consumer products company and consumer packaged products. And so the culture in the US has a much deeper cannabis culture as well. In Europe, they look at cannabis as a pure medicine. In the US, it's both something for entertaining, and for casual use, and it's also a lot of people do use it for medical purposes. But it does make a difference in two different cultures.
Thank you. So some topical stuff recently with respect to news around hemp ban and recent legislation. Does that have any impact for you that you can speak to at Curaleaf?
Listen, it had a minimal impact on our business. Everybody knows we did get into the beverage side of it. However, it was a very small investment because we wanted to wait until there was more clarity on where the sector is going to go. Listen, I have a very short comment for everybody. I think this is a time when finally everyone needs to get together to lobby the government on an overall reform package around the plant. And when I say the plant, I mean whether it's hemp or cannabis. In order to get one piece of transparent legislation around the various cannabinoids and that will free us to operate in the U.S. on a more free basis, depending on where I don't care whether you're taking the THC from hemp or you're taking the THC from the cannabis plant. What I care about is that there's one set of rules around it, and it's equal for everybody in the marketplace. And I think that maybe the current situation that we're in will lead to that over the next year, maybe year and a half, but I do think it will lead, because as I was speaking to a CEO of a major national distributor, a very famous company, I won't name it, that person said, what nobody understands is that you can't put demand back into the bottle. The demand of the consumer wants these products. And I think that will come out over the next couple of weeks as we start to see more and more people getting upset about the fact that these products may disappear. And so we need one set of regulation that governs the whole industry. And I think that hopefully what the actions that we just saw will lead to that.
Great. There was some talk earlier, but I want to revisit the topic of what's been going on with some of the MSOs and whether it's liquidation, receivership, in and out of court restructuring. How does that affect Curaleaf, both from an opportunistic standpoint as well as, to the point Charlie made earlier about kind of the natural evolution of a growing and relatively maturing business?
Well, I think I think Charlie said it right in his earlier talk. I think it's a natural progression of a developing, emerging industry. And I wouldn't put only the MSOs. We all know there's I think it's 5 or 6 medium-sized companies that are going through different types of restructurings right now, whether they be liquidations, restructurings, Canadian bankruptcies. I think the bigger issue outside of that is we're seeing it across the board in almost every state that has either unlimited licenses or a lot of licenses were granted. Even independents, and I worry more about them because they're the future, in my opinion, of the industry in terms of being our customers. A lot of these licensees, whether they be social equity licensees or independent companies, they can't pay their bills. And we're seeing large receivables starting to build up. They're starting to get cut off. And these companies will inevitably fail because of that. And so, for instance, in New York, we have an experimental project under Curaleaf has launched a program where we're working with social equity licensees and with independents and teaching them inventory managing, teaching them how to run their businesses, teaching them how to assort their stores, how to price their products so that they can be successful. Because in the end of the day, they're our customers. We're a brand company that sells products to independent dispensaries as well as other MSOs. And we want these companies to be successful. And so we're going to work with them. And we want to try to get them to be as successful as they possibly can. And we started this launch program in New York. We're helping them with taxes. We're helping them with accounting issues. And we're doing seminars for them. And we're trying to get these independent operators to become better operators. One has to remember, a lot of the people in the cannabis sector, particularly in the independent area, have never managed a business before in their life. So this is the first time they're doing it. And so a lot of them just don't know. It's not that they're bad operators. They just don't know how to operate. And so we're trying to work with them to get them to do better. As far as the MSO market goes, well, I think that what you're going to see over the next several months is that you've seen a dramatic price compression in the market. Some of the players had, shorter-term debt maturities. They were over-levered on their balance sheets, and they didn't have the scale in order to be able to cover that. And I think that what you're going to see is you're going to see these companies get sold off in pieces so that the creditors will come in, they'll convert their debt to equity, they'll take control of these companies. But creditors are not good operators. They don't like to be operators, so inevitably they're going to sell off these assets. And I think that a lot of these states are going to be faced with the issue is, do we allow these companies to consolidate, or do we allow these companies to go bankrupt? And I think that there's going to be too much job losses, so I do think the states will allow consolidation to a certain extent. They may put some guardrails around it, but I do think they'll allow it, and I do think that you'll see more and more consolidation. And again, I don't want to scare the market by saying the MSOs are going to dominate over the U.S. Cannabis market. As a matter of fact, I think there's a bigger fear where, it's not the MSOs that are the problem. It's going to be the big consumer products companies, right? They're going to dominate over the sector at some point in time, and everyone will be in the same place. And so I think that you do want to have some players in the sector that are going to be a little bit bigger so they can survive the competition when you get the Anheuser-Busch's of the world involved in the sector, when you get the big food companies or the confection companies that get into the sector. You want to have industry players that can compete. There'll always be craft players in the market that'll pop up and distribute, but if you look at, for instance, the beer industry, we've seen a lot of fallout in the craft area. However, there's still brands that are prospering and are doing well, and I think you'll see the same thing in the cannabis industry.
One of the things we see advising, a number of different MSOs and some private single state operators is this process begins sort of the proving ground, if you will, for capital providers that aren't necessarily in the market today, that are looking for sort of a efficient and rational process in something that really doesn't have a ton of precedent and doesn't have really any federal bankruptcy guidelines or code. And so, one of the things we've been heartened by is investors starting to realize that the market realities don't necessarily threaten a terrible outcome for the secured creditors. And so we think that's an important dynamic over time that plays out, particularly like I said, there's no precedent. And I think companies like Curaleaf are a direct beneficiary of that growing confidence.
Well, listen, I think the biggest problem this industry has right now is a stable capital source, and one that's actually economical. And that has largely to do with the absolute madness of the regulatory environment between federal and state in the sector. And I think between us, it is an intentional effort on certain people in the government, certain politicians that want that to happen because they're against the cannabis sector. But again, as the CEO of a very major multinational company told me the other day, he said, you can't put back into the bottle what the consumer wants. And the consumers globally, they want cannabis. And so eventually the stronger companies will prevail in this environment. But what we all need to do is unite around some level of federal reform, because I will tell you that our company is growing in Europe at 5 times the rate of what we're growing in the United States. And the reason for that is the regulators there have a very transparent set of rules. You understand what you're playing in. You don't have this bifurcation between federal and local. You know how to price. There's capital available in Europe. As long as you have, Curaleaf was approached just the other day by literally one of the top 5 banks in the world to represent us only in Europe. They won't represent us in the United States in order to raise capital. And the reason they can do that is because the rules in Europe are transparent, and it's federally, or whatever we call it, it's legal in Europe to be in this business. In the United States, you have this problem, and a lot of investors don't want to get involved in this sector. And so if you look at what happened, for instance, on Friday, cannabis stocks were down 25%. I didn't look what they're doing today, but I assume, and it's all because the U.S. capital market on the equity side is run by algorithms. There's no depth. There's no fundamental large-scale institutional investors that are involved. And so these algorithms manipulate the market up and down the way they want, and they carry out the retail investors. The only place I've ever seen this before, and it's interesting, was I used to own an online poker business back in the day, and there was a difference between what they call the sharks and the fish. And what happened on the online poker business was the sharks were eating the fish all the time, and so the inexperienced players were losing their money to the experienced players, and eventually it killed the online poker business. It virtually doesn't exist anymore as an industry. Some of these companies were $2-3 billion because that happened. And that's exactly what's happening here. And with every time you have these massive volatility in the equity market, less and less retail investors want to participate because the algorithms controlled by the large banks in Canada are manipulating the stocks. And going to debt, on the debt side, you do have players that want to get involved, but we had, the president came out in August and said there was going to be some news on cannabis over the next few weeks. It hasn't come out, and so now people are waiting, and rightfully so, and saying we want to hear what the president has to say on this before they commit capital. And so right now it's a very difficult capital environment in the cannabis sector, but hopefully we'll get some visibility into this pretty soon, and I think that capital will definitely rush into. The good news is the capital wants to come into the sector. I've been raising institutional capital for the last 35 years for a lot of the different businesses that I've built, and I can tell you the institutional capital will be there. It will be there in size. It will want to participate, but it's going to wait until we get some transparency from the federal government.
I agree with that. So pivoting a little bit, a couple things have happened since August of last year. You got a little more involved, or back involved, in day-to-day operations. And I'm kind of curious, 15 months later, what your perspective is now, what it was when you made that decision, which was a big decision.
Well, my golf game's gotten a lot worse. And I was happily semi-retired managing my family office out of Florida. And here I am living in Stamford, Connecticut, working again after promising my family I was going to retire at the age of 53. And here I am, almost 60, and I'm running Curaleaf again. Listen, I love what I do. I'm an entrepreneur at heart, and I was happy to enter back in. I mean, I think Curaleaf slightly lost its way between the various, between COVID and the various CEOs that we had in the company. And I always say that if you're not happy with the way things are being done, come in and do it yourself. And so I've been an entrepreneur and I've run companies for the last 35 years. I was hoping I wasn't going to do it again, but here I am doing it, and I'm having, to be honest, a very good time doing it. The results of the company have really turned around. We've had a stabilization in the second quarter. We had a solid third quarter, and I think we're going to have a better fourth quarter. And so the company, a year after coming in, has really started to show signs of coming back. And I think that that's a testament to the whole team. It's been a very difficult environment, but we've been able to focus on quality, focus on our products, focus on our customers, which is the most important thing, whether they be wholesale customers or retail customers. And as long as you're providing a very high-quality product that people want, people will buy it. And so we are seeing people coming back in. The footsteps in our doors have gone up quite dramatically recently, and we're seeing a resurgence of people coming back to Curaleaf stores because we focused on making sure that we had very high-quality products. So don't try to be all things to all men. Try to do what you can do very well, and make sure that your stores have the products that are required at the right time, at the right place, and at the right price. And then on the wholesale side, make sure that you're touching all the doors and you're focusing on those customers and you're giving them the services that they need. And these are simple things. And if you do these things well and you do them day after day, your business turns around. And so, listen, it's been an interesting 15 months since I stepped back as CEO. I think I'm going to be here for a little bit more, but I'm having a good time doing it. And I love seeing results. The best thing for any entrepreneur is to see the results of your work. If the company's doing better, you feel better about it, your people feel better about it, and that's what we're seeing right now at Curaleaf, so I'm happy.
The other thing that happened later last year was obviously a new presidential administration. Obviously, you're in a position where you have to be a little bit mindful, but maybe you could give us some perspective on the difference between the previous and current administration for the industry.
Well, at least this president's working. And he's on the job. Listen, I think that I'm going to repeat what was said in the panel earlier with George and Charlie, and that is that we have several times that President Trump has come out in support of both rescheduling and other initiatives in the cannabis sector, as well as legal adult use in Florida. And I tend to believe President Trump he really tends to stick behind his promises to his electorate. And he has publicly now mentioned several times that he's in support of rescheduling and, more importantly, in support of medical research on the plant. And so he recently posted a video relating to the endocannabinoid system in the human body, which is very relevant. And I can tell you, as Curaleaf, we're doing human testing on neuropathic pain medication in Europe. We're not allowed to do it in the US. And rescheduling would allow us to do that here in the United States. We would be able to work with the FDA on these drugs. We have had terrific results. We're going to be making an announcement shortly with neuropathic pain medication in Europe. And it will, the one thing that the president hates is the onslaught of opiates and fentanyl and things like that. And I can tell you that these neuropathic pain medications that we're working on are not addictive. They're much healthier for the human body, and they work. That's the most important thing. And the results have been very, very interesting. And again, we'll be making an announcement in that regard. And so I do not understand how on the one hand, we're fighting a fentanyl epidemic and an opiate epidemic in the U.S., and secondly, we have this amazing plant that has these amazing properties in it that can actually help people, one, get off of opiates, but two, can actually deal with the one thing opiates do deal with, and that's pain management, in such a way that's not addictive and not harmful to the person. So we're very hopeful that President Trump, who understands this and wouldn't have posted a video like that if he didn't, does eventually get to reschedule. Now, the timing of that is up to him. He's the president. I don't get involved in that aspect of it, but I'm very confident that he will do it.
Yeah, I think there's exactly one person who will determine the timing on all this stuff.
I think so.
So we're concluded, Boris.
Wow, that was good. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. All right, so next up, we've got the federal policy landscape with Representative Randy